Welcome to Life Stories. Today, we bring you an incredible tale of how a simple act of kindness can change lives in the most unexpected ways. When Ben Carter, a young cashier, helped a struggling teenage mother by paying for her baby's diapers, he had no idea his selfless gesture would cost him his job and lead to a life-changing encounter with a billionaire. This heartwarming story is full of twists, lessons about compassion, and the reminder that kindness always finds its way back. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to follow today's inspiring journey on Life Stories. It was one of those dreary afternoons where the hum of the fluorescent lights in the grocery store seemed louder than usual. Customers shuffled through the aisles with their carts, heads down, lost in their own little worlds. I was stationed at the register, scanning items, bagging groceries, and offering polite nods to anyone who glanced my way. As the newest cashier at Turner's Groceries, a small family-owned store in Chicago, I was still finding my footing. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was steady, and it gave me a chance to interact with people. I always believed that small acts of kindness could make a big difference, even in the most mundane settings. But that day, I had no idea how much those beliefs would be put to the test. I first noticed her in the baby aisle, a young woman, no older than 19 or 20, cradling a tiny baby against her chest. Her hair was pulled back into a messy ponytail, and her clothes were plain but clean, though they hung a little loosely on her frame as if she'd recently lost weight. Her eyes told the real story, worn down, distant, and brimming with a kind of worry that only comes from carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders. She was standing there, motionless, staring at the shelves stacked with baby products. I paused for a moment, pretending to adjust the placement of the candy bars near my register. But my attention was fixed on her. She picked up a pack of diapers, her fingers brushing the soft packaging, and studied the price tag. Then, with a heavy sigh, she set it back on the shelf. She moved to the formula cans, her baby stirring slightly as she shifted him in her arms. She lingered there for what felt like forever, her hand hovering over the can of formula. Finally, she picked it up, glanced one more time at the diapers, and began walking toward the register. Her steps were slow, her shoulders slouched. It was clear that choosing the formula over the diapers wasn't an easy decision. But it was the one she'd made. As she reached my register, she placed the can of formula on the counter with trembling hands, her gaze fixed firmly on the floor. The baby, snug against her chest in a worn carrier, made a small noise, but she gently patted his back, calming him instantly. I scanned the formula and hesitated for a moment, watching her from the corner of my eye. She wasn't wearing any makeup, and her face was pale, but there was a kind of quiet determination about her. Even as her hands shook, it wasn't hard to piece together her story. Young, likely a single mother, trying her best to make ends meet. But the one thing that stuck with me the most was the way she glanced back at the diapers in her cart. A flicker of longing in her eyes before she quickly looked away. "Just the formula?" I asked softly, trying to keep my tone as gentle as possible. She nodded without meeting my gaze. "Yeah, just the formula," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I glanced at the diapers still sitting in her cart. "You forgot the diapers," I said, my voice calm and steady, though I already suspected the reason why she wasn't buying them. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with panic. I can't," she stammered, her words barely audible. That was all she said. But in that moment, she didn't need to say more. I understood. She couldn't afford them. She had to choose between feeding her baby and keeping him clean and dry. The weight of that choice, the sheer unfairness of it, settled in my chest like a heavy stone. I thought about my own life, how I'd struggled to get by in college, juggling multiple jobs and living off instant noodles most nights. But I didn't have anyone depending on me back then. I couldn't imagine what it must feel like to be in her position, to have to make those kinds of sacrifices. Without thinking, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my wallet. I didn't have much, just enough to get me through to the next paycheck, but I knew I couldn't stand by and do nothing. I swiped my card across the reader, adding the diapers to her total, and then handed them to her. "Take them," I said firmly but kindly. "You can pay me back whenever you're able." For a moment, she just stared at me, her eyes wide and shimmering with tears. Her lips parted as if she wanted to say something, but no words came out. Finally, she managed to whisper, "Thank you." The gratitude in her voice was so raw, so genuine, that it took me by surprise. She clutched the diapers to her chest like they were the most precious thing in the world. And maybe, in that moment, they were. To her, those diapers weren't just a basic necessity, they were hope. Proof that someone, a stranger no less, had seen her struggle and cared enough to help. "Take care of your little one," I said quietly, giving her a small nod. She gave me a tearful smile and walked away, holding her baby close as she left the store. I wish I could say that was the end of it, that the story wrapped up neatly with a happy ending. But life doesn't always work that way. As soon as she was out the door, I noticed the whispers behind me. A middle-aged man in a plaid shirt was shaking his head, his arms crossed over his chest. "Do you think that's fair?" he grumbled. "You just gave away store products. This is a business, not a charity." "Yeah, I don't know about that," another customer chimed in, a woman adjusting the strap of her purse. "People shouldn't just get things for free. What kind of store allows that?" Their words stung, but I didn't let it show. I kept scanning items, my fingers gripping the edges of the register a little tighter than usual. I knew they wouldn't understand. To them, it was just about the rules, about fairness. But to me, it was about something much bigger than that. It was about compassion, about doing the right thing even when it wasn't easy. I thought the murmurs would die down eventually, but before long, Mr. Turner, the store manager, appeared at the end of the aisle. His face was stern, his jaw set in that way that told me this wasn't going to be a pleasant conversation. I sighed, already knowing what was coming. "Ben," he said sharply, gesturing for me to follow him. "In my office. Now." And just like that, the moment of hope and kindness I tried to create began to unravel. But even as I walked toward his office, my stomach sinking with every step, I didn't regret what I had done. Not for a second. I followed Mr. Turner into his office, the weight of the moment pressing down on me like a lead blanket. The door closed behind me with a dull thud, cutting off the low murmurs of the store floor. The space was small, barely big enough for his desk, a filing cabinet, and 2 chairs. But it suddenly felt suffocating. Mr. Turner gestured for me to sit, but the look in his eyes told me this wasn't going to be a casual conversation. I hesitated for a moment before lowering myself into the chair, trying to steady my breathing. He sat down across from me, folding his hands neatly on the desk. For a long moment, he just looked at me, his expression unreadable. The silence stretched, each second feeling heavier than the last. "I heard what happened out there," he finally said, his voice calm but firm. "You gave away a package of diapers. Is that true?" I nodded, deciding there was no point in denying it. "Yes, sir," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I paid for them myself." He raised an eyebrow, his lips pressing into a thin line. "That's not the point, Ben. This isn't about who paid for it. It's about following procedure. You know we have strict policies about giving away merchandise, even if it's for a good cause." I opened my mouth to respond, but he held up a hand to stop me. "I get it," he continued. "You saw someone in need, and you wanted to help. I admire that. I really do. But this is a business, and businesses have rules for a reason. If we let every cashier start giving away products to whoever they think deserves it, where does it end?" The words stung, not because they were cruel, but because they were so matter-of-fact. I knew he wasn't wrong, Policies existed for a reason. And technically, I had broken them. But the thought of that young mother, her face etched with desperation as she cradled her baby, made it impossible for me to regret my decision. I understand the rules, I said, meeting his gaze. But I couldn't just stand there and do nothing. She needed help, and I was in a position to do something about it. Mr. Turner sighed, leaning back in his chair. For a moment, he looked almost tired, like this conversation was as difficult for him as it was for me. Ben, you're a good kid, he said, his tone softening slightly. You've been here, what, a couple of months? And you've done a good job. But this isn't about how good of a person you are. It's about the integrity of the store. If word gets out that we're bending the rules for some customers, we'll lose control. I nodded again, though my stomach churned. I could see where he was coming from, but it didn't make the situation any easier to accept. He leaned forward, clasping his hands together on the desk. I hate to do this, but I have to let you go. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I felt my breath hitch, my mind racing as I tried to process what he'd just said. Let me go. I'd expected a warning, maybe even a write-up, but not this. I thought about arguing, about pleading my case. But one look at his face told me it wouldn't make a difference. His mind was already made up. I'm sorry, he added, though his voice lacked any real warmth. You can pick up your final paycheck on your way out. I forced myself to nod, swallowing the lump that had formed in my throat. I understand, I said quietly, standing up from the chair. My legs felt shaky, but I managed to hold myself steady. Thank you for the opportunity. Mr. Turner gave me a curt nod. And just like that, it was over. I walked out of his office and back into the store, feeling the weight of every gaze on me as I grabbed my jacket from the break room. The whispers started again as I made my way toward the exit. But I ignored them, keeping my head high. I wasn't ashamed of what I'd done. When I stepped outside, the cold Chicago air hit me like a slap in the face. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm of emotions swirling inside me. Anger, frustration, sadness, they all mixed together, making it hard to think clearly. But beneath all of that, there was a small spark of something else. Hope, maybe, or pride. I wasn't sure. All I knew was that I'd done the right thing, even if it had cost me my job. That evening, I sat at the small table in my apartment, staring at the blank page of my notebook. I'd been jotting down ideas for new jobs, cafes, delivery services, anything that could bring in a steady income, but the words wouldn't come. My mind kept drifting back to the young mother and her baby, to the way her eyes had filled with tears when I handed her the diapers. I didn't even know her name, but I couldn't stop wondering if she was okay, if she'd made it home safely, if the little bit of help I'd offered had made any real difference. Eventually, exhaustion caught up with me. I closed the notebook, pushed it aside, and dragged myself to bed. As I lay there in the dark, the uncertainty of the future loomed large. I had no idea what tomorrow would bring, but I knew I'd find a way to move forward. I always had. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have possibly predicted, was that tomorrow would bring something far beyond anything I'd ever imagined. Because while I slept, my life was already beginning to change in ways I couldn't yet comprehend. The morning began like any other, with the soft buzz of my alarm pulling me from sleep. My tiny Chicago apartment felt colder than usual, the kind of chill that seeped into your bones and reminded you that winter was only weeks away. I shuffled out of bed, rubbing the sleep from my eyes, and tried to push away the heaviness that had settled over me the night before. Losing my job wasn't exactly the way I'd planned to end the week. But there was no time to wallow in self-pity. I had bills to pay and a future to figure out. I made my way to the kitchen, switching on the coffee maker and letting the familiar aroma fill the air. It was a small comfort, but one I clung to. My notebook, still open from the night before, sat on the counter. I glanced at the half-finished list of potential job options and sighed. Cafes. Retail stores. Delivery gigs, none of them felt like a solution. But they were all I had for now. As I leaned against the counter, sipping my coffee and trying to muster the energy to start the day, a sound broke through the quiet, a low, rhythmic hum that grew louder by the second. I frowned, setting my mug down and walking to the window. At first, I thought it was construction or maybe a delivery truck. But then I saw it, a sleek black helicopter descending into the small parking lot behind my apartment building. I blinked, certain I was still half asleep. A helicopter? Here! Dust and leaves swirled in the air as the rotors slowed, and I could see my neighbors peeking out of their windows, just as confused as I was. Before I could process what was happening, there was a sharp knock at my door. My heart jumped. Who could that possibly be? I hesitated for a moment, then moved cautiously to the door. When I opened it, I found myself face to face with two men in dark suits. They were tall, polished, and had an air of quiet authority that made it clear they weren't here to sell me something. Ben Carter, the taller of the two, asked, his voice steady and polite. Yeah, I replied, my confusion evident. The man extended his hand. Good morning, Mr. Carter. My name is William. And this is my colleague, Daniels. We're here on behalf of Mr. Robert Harrison. The name hit me like a bolt of lightning. Robert Harrison. The billionaire tech mogul. The man who owned half of Silicon Valley and whose face was on the cover of every business magazine. I stared at the two men, trying to make sense of what they were saying. Why would someone like Robert Harrison be sending people to my door? I'm sorry. What? I managed to say. Did you say Robert Harrison? William nodded, his expression calm but serious. Yes. Mr. Carter. Mr. Harrison asked us to speak with you. May we come in? I hesitated, glancing back at my messy apartment. It wasn't exactly presentable, but I figured these men weren't here to judge my housekeeping skills. I stepped aside, motioning for them to enter. They walked in with the kind of confidence that only came from working for someone as powerful as Robert Harrison. Okay, I said, shutting the door behind them. What's this about? William turned to face me, his gaze steady. We need to ask you something. Did you assist a young mother at your store yesterday? My stomach dropped. The memory of the young woman, her baby, and the diapers came rushing back. Yeah, I did. I said slowly. Why? Is she okay? William's expression softened slightly, and he nodded. She's fine. In fact, she's more than fine. That young mother you helped, her name is Emily Harrison. She's Mr. Harrison's daughter. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard him. Emily Harrison? Robert Harrison's daughter? My mind raced as I tried to connect the dots. The young woman I'd helped yesterday, the one who couldn't afford diapers, was the daughter of one of the wealthiest men in the country. It didn't make sense. But she couldn't even afford diapers, I said, voicing my confusion. How does that happen? Why was she struggling like that? William exchanged a glance with Daniels before responding. It's complicated. Let's just say that circumstances aren't always what they appear, even for people like the Harrison family. Daniels stepped forward, his voice calm but earnest. Mr. Harrison wants to thank you personally. He'll explain everything about his daughter and their situation. If you're willing, we'd like you to come with us now. I stared at them, unsure of what to say. Part of me wanted to refuse, to tell them I didn't need any thanks or explanations. But another part of me, the part that couldn't stop thinking about Emily and her baby, wanted to know the truth. And then there was the helicopter waiting outside. A reminder that this wasn't some ordinary situation. Give me a minute, I said, grabbing my jacket from the back of a chair. My hands were shaking slightly as I slipped it on, and I tried to ignore the nervous energy buzzing in my chest. Before I could second-guess myself, I followed the two men out of my apartment. The parking lot was a flurry of activity. Curious neighbors watched from their windows as the helicopter's rotors began spinning again, sending another flurry of dust into the air. William and Daniels guided me toward the sleek black machine, and as I climbed inside, the hum of the rotors filled my ears. The interior of the helicopter was as luxurious as I'd imagined, with plush leather seats and a polished metal finish. I buckled myself in, my mind still racing as we lifted off the ground. The city of Chicago spread out below us, but I barely noticed. All I could think about was Emily, her baby, and the man I was about to meet. The flight was short, just under an hour, and when we landed, I found myself staring at the sprawling estate of Robert Harrison. It was like something out of a movie, grand, elegant, and impossibly perfect. The kind of place you'd expect a billionaire to call home. As I stepped out of the helicopter, I saw him waiting. Robert Harrison. The man himself. He was tall, sharply dressed, and carried himself with a quiet authority that was both intimidating and impressive. He approached me with a warm smile, extending his hand. "Mr. Carter," he said, his voice smooth and confident. "Thank you for coming. I've been looking forward to meeting you." I shook his hand, still trying to wrap my head around everything that was happening. "It's nice to meet you, Mr. Harrison," I said. "But I have to admit, I'm a little confused. Why am I here?" His smile softened, and for the first time, I saw something in his eyes that I hadn't expected: gratitude. "It's about my daughter," he said simply, "and what you did for her yesterday. You have no idea how much that meant to her. Or to me." As the sun set over the sprawling Harrison estate, Ben Carter sat quietly on the porch, watching Emily play with her baby in the garden. The events of the past few days still felt surreal. A simple act of kindness had completely transformed his life. From being a cashier struggling to make ends meet to now having the chance to work for one of the most successful businessmen in the country. It all felt like a dream. But as he reflected on it all, one thing became clear: kindness, no matter how small, has the power to change lives in ways we can never predict. Ben knew that his journey was just beginning. With a renewed sense of purpose and hope for the future, he felt ready to embrace whatever came next. If you enjoyed today's story, don't forget to like, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another inspiring tale from Life Stories. See you next time.